Pleasant good afternoon. Welcome to the 2022 lecture series, The Road to Republic, exploring 400 years of a political experiment. This series is being mounted by the Barbados Museum and Historical Society, the Department of History and Philosophy, UWI-KPhil, in association with the Embassy of Argentina. I am Henderson Carter, Senior Lecturer in History in the Department of History and Philosophy and Head of Department. Welcome. I am honored this afternoon to introduce our speaker, our distinguished speaker, Ambassador David Kamishan, to deliver this lecture. David Kamishan was born on the 17th of April, 1960, in the Caribbean island of St. Vincent. The son of a traveling Methodist minister of religion, David received his primary education at Tranquility Primary School in Trinidad before attending Harrison College and the University of the West Indies in Barbados. He won a Barbados exhibition in 1979 and the Sir Fred Phillips Academic Prize at the Faculty of Law, UWI, in 1981, and has been a practicing attorney at law since 1984. David Kamishan is a former senator in the government of Barbados and is currently Barbados's ambassador to the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, and to the Association of Caribbean States, ACS. And I want to add, and doing an excellent job. He is also the founder member of the Caribbean Pan-African Network, CPAN, the Clement Payne Movement of Barbados, the Caribbean chapter of the International Network in Defense of Humanity, and the Global African Congress, GAC, and was an architect and the first director of the Barbados Government Commission for Pan-African Affairs, CPAA. He has represented the Caribbean region at the 7th Pan-African Congress in Uganda in 1994, played a key role in the United Nations World Conference Against Racism in South Africa 2001, and has represented the diaspora on the African Union Economic, Social, and Cultural Council. Since the year 2012, Mr. Kamishan has served as a member of Barbados's National Task Force on Reparations. He is also the author of several books. For example, The Wide Streets of Tomorrow, Essays and Speeches, It's a Healing of the Nation, The Case of Reparations, and The Pan-African Love Story of Arnold and Mignon Ford. Let us welcome this afternoon Ambassador David Kamishan to deliver this address on 400 years of political experiment. Ambassador Kamishan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Andy, for that very gracious and generous introduction. Let me begin by thanking the Barbados Museum and Historical Society, the University of the West Indies, KPhil campus, and the Embassy of Argentina for doing me the honor of inviting me to be a lecturer in this lecture series. The overall title of the lecture series is Road to Republic, and my topic is exploring 400 years of a political experiment. I interpreted that topic to mean that I was required to carry out an examination of the political and constitutional or governance dimensions of Barbados's 400-year journey to Republican status. And so that's what I will attempt to do this afternoon. And I want to begin with the simple thesis that Barbados, 400 years ago, at the time of its settlement by Europeans, and for many, many years thereafter, was the very antithesis of a republic. And so let us commence the examination of that thesis, and let us begin with the definition of a republic. And for me, in order to properly understand what a republic is, one must begin with an understanding of the concept of sovereignty. Sovereignty, put simply, is the power to do everything necessary to govern oneself. So if we apply that concept to a people, we would say sovereignty is the power of a people as a collective to do everything necessary to govern themselves. If you apply it to a state or nation, sovereignty is the power of a state or nation to do everything required to govern itself. And so a republic is a state or nation in which sovereignty, the power to carry out all governmental functions, is vested in the people as a collective body. And we can be more precise and concrete in our definition by saying that a republic is a state or nation in which supreme power is held by the collective body of the people through their elected representatives, that is, through representatives freely and democratically elected by the people, and that has an elected or democratically appointed head of state rather than a monarch or other non-elected hereditary head of state. And I would argue that Barbados arrived at that situation of a state in which power is vested in the people, sovereignty is vested in the people and their democratically elected representatives. That Barbados arrived at that condition on the 30th of November of 2021. And that when we began the settlement of Barbados, we began with the very opposite of a situation in which sovereignty or power was vested in the people. Anyhow, let us now delve deeply into our examination of my opening thesis by taking a quick look at the very beginning of the process of the settlement of the island of Barbados by the Europeans, namely the British. And in so doing, we will also take a quick look at how Barbados first came into connection with the British monarchy, the institution that we severed ties with on the 30th of November of 2021. Let me refer you to a very famous 19th century book about Barbados, The History of Barbados by Robert H. Schomburg. And I quote, this is Schomburg telling us about our early history. And he says, the first English vessel which touched at Barbados appears to have been the Olive Blossom on 14th April 1605. Well, he's wrong with the date 1605. We know from more accurate historical researches that it was actually 1625. The crew took possession of the country by erecting a cross and cut upon the bark of a tree which stood near, quote, James, K of E, and this island, end of quote. That is James, King of England, and this island. So here we have the notion that the island belongs to the then ruling King of England, King James I. And Schomburg goes on to tell us, and I quote, Sir William Cortine, a merchant of London, who was deeply engaged in the trade with the New World, received accounts respecting the fertility and commodious situation of the island, which confirmed him in his plan of forming a settlement in Barbados. In the quote, we are then told by Schomburg that Lord Leigh, also known as the Earl of Marlborough, the Lord High Treasurer of England, applied to King James I for a patent to secure the island to him and his heirs forever, and that under his protection, Sir William Cortine sent ships to Barbados to commence a settlement. Of those ships, one, the William and John, commanded by Henry Powell, arrived in Barbados on the 17th of February, 1627, and landed on the leeward side of the island in 80 English and 10 enslaved Africans. Apparently, the vessel on its voyage from England to Barbados stumbled upon a Portuguese slave ship that was making its journey from Africa, from the west coast of Africa to the Caribbean, overpowered the Portuguese ship and appropriated 10 enslaved Africans that were on that Portuguese ship. So the William and John landed not only English settlers, but also 10 enslaved Africans at the very commencement of the settlement of Barbados. So here we have the schema of the foundation and design of Barbados's original system of colonial domination, our original system of what we can call unfreedom, the system of colonial domination and oppression of Barbados. And what is that schema? Well, first of all, the appropriation of ownership of the island by the monarch and royal family of England, King James I. Secondly, the monarch purporting to grant a patent over the island to one man, thereby purporting to make this one man the Lord Proprietor of the island, the autocratic master of the island. And thirdly, at the very outset, the establishment of slavery, African slavery, the establishment of a class of English and European slave owners and a class of Black or African slaves. So these are the three pillars of Barbados's original system of unfreedom, Barbados's system of colonial domination, a society in which many of its inhabitants, soon to become the majority, the Black majority, were enslaved, possessed little or no rights, possessed no sovereignty, no power. Now, let's look briefly at that monarchy pillar of Barbados's initial colonial structure. Who exactly was this King James I? This head of the British royal family back in 1625. Now, a royal family is a family which claims that it has the right to reign or rule over a nation or people by hereditary right. That is, that it possesses a rulership position that is automatically passed on as a right from parent to child. Nothing to do with the people voting for them to have that position. They earn that position by simply being born into this special family. The currently existing monarch of Britain, the 96-year-old Queen Elizabeth II, is the head of that branch of the British so-called royal family known as the House of Windsor. So we have a royal family, a British royal family that over the centuries has had different branches of that royal family occupying the throne of Britain and ruling as monarch. The current branch that occupies the throne is the branch known as the House of Windsor. That branch of the British royal family has been occupying the throne or monarchy of Britain since 1910. It's their reign started with the grandfather of the current queen, King George V. But the British royal family as a whole, inclusive of such other branches as the Hanoverians, the Stuarts, the Tudors, and the Normans, have held the throne or monarchy of Britain since the year 1066. Now, those of you who are my age or older will know a lot about the year 1066, because as soon as we entered secondary school in Barbados and we took our first history class, we were introduced to the year 1066 and an event known as the Battle of Hastings, and a historic personality known as William the Conqueror. And we were introduced to this event as if it was the beginning of the world. The world started with the Battle of Hastings in 1066. And what was this Battle of Hastings? Well, in 1066, a warlord from northern France, from a place called Normandy in northern France, sailed across the British Channel with his mercenaries, his mercenary army, engaged in warfare with the then Anglo-Saxon king of Britain, defeated the British Anglo-Saxon king, conquered Britain, and installed himself as William the Conqueror, King William the Conqueror, and thereby installed his family as the royal family of Britain. And that royal family has been occupying the throne of Britain since 1066, beginning with William the Conqueror, a warlord from northern France. And as I said, over the first branch of the family that ruled, the Normans, and they were subsequently.
What may you feel bad for asking such an absurd question, and you're defending yourself?
I think somebody needs to mute. Now, let us examine the nexus between the monarchy pillar and the proprietorship pillar of Barbados's initial colonial structure. We have already learned that King James I granted a patent to secure the island to the Earl of Marlborough and his heirs forever, and that the Earl of Marlborough in turn authorized a merchant prince, Sir William Cortine, to send ships to Barbados and to commence a settlement. Thus, from the very outset, the Barbados project was not only a royalist enterprise or even a feudalist enterprise centered on a lord proprietor, but it was also a commercial, mercantile, profit-based, capitalist enterprise. And that is very important, because we are saying that Barbados, from the commencement of its settlement, was the antithesis of a republic, the very opposite of a state in which sovereignty and power was vested in the people. And what we are seeing here, we are seeing the royalist dimension of power in Barbados. We are seeing the feudalist dimension of power with the appointment of a lord proprietor. But we're also seeing something that perhaps we haven't been very conscious of before, a mercantile, capitalist, commercial dimension to the construction of power in Barbados from the very beginning. So it begins, that aspect of it begins with Sir William Cortine, a merchant, a new type of merchant prince that had emerged in Britain in the 1620s. A merchant with connections all over in several parts of the world, and with a ship of fleets to capitalize on those international connections. This is the beginning. This is the beginning of capitalism, the very beginning of capitalism in its primitive accumulation phase. And to give you further evidence of this commercial, mercantile, capitalist construct, let me say that King James I died on the 27th of March, 1625. He was succeeded by his son, King Charles I, and almost immediately that King Charles I took over the throne, a man named James Hay, the first Earl of Carlisle, approached the new king and obtained from King Charles I a grant of all of the Caribbean islands, including Barbados. So just as the Earl of Marlborough had been granted a patent by King James I, the Earl of Carlisle got a subsequent patent from the succeeding king, a more powerful patent, I might add. And the importance of this is that Carlisle was a spendthrift courtier who was in serious financial debt. And he saw this grant of a patent over Barbados as a solution to his financial problems. And he was heavily in debt to a group of London merchants. So his solution was to give in payment to these merchants a lease of 10,000 acres of land in Barbados. This merchant syndicate promptly sent out a group of settlers under a governor, Charles Wolverston, who was armed with a commission from the Earl of Carlisle, but they also sent along with Charles Wolverston. Wolverston was appointed by Carlisle, but they also sent along a lieutenant governor, a Mr. John Swan, appointed on the direction of the Company of Merchants. So I'm emphasizing the point. At the very commencement, it is not only Barbados is not only a royalist enterprise, it is not only a feudalist enterprise, but it is very much a commercial, capitalist, mercantile enterprise. And at the very bottom of that enterprise are the masses of powerless, sovereignty-less people. In fact, the commission given to Governor Wolverston authorized him to execute justice, decide controversies, keep His Majesty's peace, and punish offenders according to the nature of their offenses and according to the law of England. So this is the beginning of the all-powerful autocratic colonial governor. In addition, the commission mandated that he was to select a convenient number of other persons, not exceeding 20, who were to be chosen by him as his council. And this was necessary because the proprietary patent of 1627 gave the Earl of Carlisle authority to make laws for Barbados, but with the consent, assent, and approbation of the freeholders. Hence the need for a council of freeholders to complement the power of the governor. The council, selected by the governor, functioned both as a privy council, in effect, an advisory committee to the governor, and also as a legislative body. And so from the very beginning, the constitutional structure of Barbados consisted of a governor who handpicked a council consisting, as you would imagine, of a number of the wealthiest planters handpicked by the governor to serve as the council, and that governor in council made laws for the island, and incidentally, that original council in 1810, that original council that was both a privy council advising the governor and a legislative body, in 1810, those two functions were separated, and the term legislative council came into use. And so the governor then no longer sat, when the council sat as the legislative council, the governor was not present, but when it sat as the Privy Council, the two functions were separated in 1810. But up to 1810, there was just one council that performed both that legislative and that Privy Council function. And council, the wealthiest and most influential planters. And one of the first acts performed by the governor in council, one of the very first lawmaking acts performed by the governor in council in the year 1636 was to resolve that Negroes and Indians who were brought to the island to be sold should serve for life unless a contract was previously made to the contrary. Now, this is extremely significant. That 1636 lawmaking event that established slavery in Barbados, institutionalized it, made it part of the legal and constitutional structure of Barbados. 1636. And something that we have not paid enough attention to. They institutionalized not only the enslavement of African people, but they also institutionalized the enslavement of the native people of Barbados and the Caribbean. And we don't stress this enough. We tend to focus simply on the construction of Black enslavement, but simultaneous was the construction and the institutionalization of the enslavement of native or indigenous people. So that was the council. Now, soon after, in addition to the council, a House of Assembly was established. The House of Assembly traces its origin to 1639 when the then governor, a man by the name of Henry Hawley, summoned a group of representatives of the island's freeholders to join with himself and the council in forming a general assembly. So the general assembly is separate from the council. It seems probable that Hawley simply chose the initial members of the general assembly himself. But soon thereafter, they came to be elected, though those elections were on the basis of a very, very restricted franchise. It may also be usefully noted that during the administration of Governor Philip Bell in the decade of the 1640s, the island was divided into 11 parishes, and the General Assembly constituted came to be composed of 2 representatives for each parish, elected by a very restrictive group of freeholders, that is, landowners, the very elite of the society. And to complete the picture of the early constitutional structure of white power in Barbados, we have to glance quickly at the Barbadian 1650 Declaration of Independence against Cromwell's Commonwealth, the 1651 Siege of Barbados, and the negotiation of the Charter of Barbados, the 1652 Charter of Barbados. You will remember that in the decade of the 1640s, Britain went into a civil war, Parliament against the monarchy. Ultimately, the parliamentary forces won. King Charles I was beheaded, 1649. Cromwell took control of England, and Barbados attempted to defy Cromwell's parliamentary forces, attempted to declare the colony of Barbados for the deposed royal family, the deposed monarchy, and that led to Cromwell sending out a squadron to lay siege to Barbados under Sir George Askew. They fought a war of independence. Ultimately, the English forces prevailed, and they negotiated a settlement that came to be known as the Charter of Barbados. At the time, the governor of Barbados was the famous Lord Willoughby. And under the Charter of Barbados, the 1652 Charter, it was stipulated that the government of Barbados should consist of a governor, a council, and an assembly, quote unquote, according to the ancient and usual custom of the island. It was further agreed and stipulated that no taxes, customs, imports, loans, or excise should be laid nor levy made on any of the inhabitants of the island without their consent in a general assembly. Furthermore, later in the 17th century, the Barbados House of Assembly established its claim to the power of the purse. That is, it claimed that it had the same right as enjoyed by the British House of Commons, that no taxes should be raised without its consent, and that it alone could initiate a money bill. And a money bill was any legislation involving the raising or spending of funds. The council could accept or reject a money bill, but it was not allowed to alter it. So what we are seeing here is we are seeing royal power royal and British colonial power in the governor and in the governor's council, but we are also seeing a House of Assembly laying hold of a significant amount of power, a House of Assembly that is periodically elected, that has managed to enforce the position that the colonial powers cannot impose any taxes on the people of Barbados unless that House of Assembly gives its consent. And in fact, only that House of Assembly can introduce any bill that raises or spends money in Barbados. So that sounds like power to the people. That sounds like a local elected institution exercising power vis-a-vis the colonial authorities. That sounds kind of Republican. But when we examine it closely, what we discover is that that House of Assembly is comprised of the planter elite, the slave-owning planter elite, that it is elected by a very small segment of the planter class of Barbados. Permit me to give you an idea as to exactly how restricted the franchise was. A law of 1721 specified that a voter, in order to qualify as a voter, to elect anyone to that House of Assembly, that Barbados House of Assembly, a voter had to have either 10 acres of land or a house with an annual taxable value of £10. In addition, that person had to be a male, that person had to be over the age of 21, that person had to be a Christian, that person had to be a British subject, and perhaps most significantly, that person had to be white. So this was written into the laws of Barbados. There was no place in that Barbados House of Assembly. There was not even any place in the roll of voters for the enslaved, for free colored, for free blacks, for black people, for native people. And this remained the situation until 1831, when the franchise was extended to Jews and free coloreds. So that is Barbados. That is Barbados for a lot of our history. The vast majority of the Barbadian people, the people at the base of that society, the black people, feature not at all in those constitutional structures of power. Well, the Lord Proprietorship pillar did not last long beyond the middle of the 17th century. After the death of the Earl of Carlisle in 1660, the proprietary government was dissolved and Barbados reverted to the crown. However, it should be noted that by the said 1660s, the English monarchy pillar was beginning to lose a significant portion of its power. England had started its journey towards a constitutional monarchy. Remember, the English king had been executed 1649. For that decade of the 1650s, England was essentially a republic. There was no monarchy. But after Cromwell's death, the Commonwealth stumbled, and ultimately King Charles VII, was able to come back to England and to assume his position as monarch of England. However, it was not a monarchy with the same power as before the English Civil War. The Parliament had one significant power. it was now moving from an absolute monarchy to a constitutional monarchy, with power being shared between the monarch on the one hand and the elected English Parliament, the British Prime Minister, and other members of government on the other hand. That journey towards a constitutional monarchy reached an advanced stage with Britain's so-called glorious Revolution of 1688, with the British Parliament gradually taking more and more control over government. But it is still true to say that the monarch, the British monarch, did retain important powers and considerable influence, not only in England, but also in England's colony of Barbados. For example, all laws enacted in Barbados were required to be transmitted to England within 3 months after their passage in the Barbados legislature for the royal sanction or disapproval. And although they should be considered in force until the king's pleasure should be known, such laws could only continue in force for 3 years unless they had been confirmed by the king. And then there was the power of the royal governor. The governor had the power to summon, on the advice of his council, to summon general assemblies and to dissolve them as he saw fit, to erect the courts of judicature, to appoint judges, justices of the peace, sheriffs, and all necessary offices, to pardon offenses, fines and forfeitures, to muster and command the militia. So that the governor continued, the governor and the British government continued to have tremendous power over Barbados. And the point I'm continually trying to make is I'm just trying to outline the political and governance structures of Barbados to indicate the degree to which Barbados was in the grip of a powerful colonial power. That is the British monarch, the British government. The only break in that power and control was a local House of Assembly. But that local House of Assembly, even though it did have some significant local power, very much an elite institution, not democratic by any means, and also an institution that played a significant role in keeping the masses of the Barbadian people, because by the end of the 17th century, for example, the large majority of the Barbadian people were the masses of Black Barbadians, the enslaved masses of Black Barbadians. So let us look at that now. Let us look at the slave-owning oligarchy. That slave-owning oligarchy began in that first settlement voyage to Barbados in 1627, when they arrived with 10 enslaved Africans. And they further institutionalized slavery in 1636. And by the 1660s, the power of the slave-owning oligarchy in Barbados had increased immensely. And in fact, Barbados had become the world's first slave society, with a powerful slave-owning white plantocracy entrenched in power and dominating the local whites-only House of Assembly. And Sir Hilary Beckles has outlined what we mean by a slave society when we say Barbados had become the world's first slave society. And he has explained that what we mean by that is not that Barbados was the first society that had slavery. It had slavery as a feature of its makeup. There were many, many societies in human history that had slavery as a feature of society, but that Barbados was the first society in human history that was built totally, completely on the basis of slavery. Its very raison d'etre, the very structure of its economy, of its social system, of its governing ideology, its whole means of sustenance, everything was built on the enslavement of African people, and as we have learned, also of Native American people. And that slave society became very significantly institutionalized in the 1661 Barbados Slavery Code, the Slavery Act passed by the Barbados legislature in 1661, which actually established the pattern for the construction and maintenance of a slave society, a pattern that was then exported to Jamaica and other Caribbean colonies, and then to the 13 colonies of North America. That slave code was further refined by the Barbados legislature in 1688. So the slave owning oligarchy had tremendously advanced its power in Barbados. Furthermore, the monarchy pillar and the slavery pillar were partnering and reinforcing each other. And it is important that we know, as we look at the hold that the British monarchy had on Barbados for so many centuries, it is important that we know that the British monarchy was an architect of this very system of African enslavement. It is important that we know that Britain's foray into African enslavement started in 1562 when Captain John Hawkins, authorized by Queen Elizabeth I, the last of the Tudor branch of the British royal family. She subsequently gave way to King James I, the first of the Stuart branch. But Queen Elizabeth not only authorized that 1562 voyage to West Africa to raid the towns and villages, to wage war on the towns and villages of West Africa, to kidnap and enslave Africans, but she sent one of her own ships, a 700-ton ship known as the Jesus of Lubeck. And so the British slave trade began with Hawkins, and Queen Elizabeth knighted John Hawkins. And then King James I, our King James I, who gave the patent to settle Barbados, he, in 1618, granted control of Britain's Africa trade, inclusive of the slave trade, to the Company of Adventurers to Guinea and Benin, Benin being Benin. His son, 1632, King Charles I, granted a license to transport slaves from Guinea to a syndicate and received donations of thousands of pounds. 1660, King Charles II established a company known as the Royal Adventurers into Africa to engage in the slave trade. And then in 1672, he took it a step further. He gave a charter to the Royal African Company, the world's greatest slave trading enterprise that brought tens of thousands of enslaved Africans to Barbados. And we can go on. Queen Anne, King George I, King George III, King William IV, on, up to the very abolition of slavery. The British monarchy are deeply involved, and through their efforts, tens of thousands of enslaved Africans are being brought to Barbados to be enslaved by that white plantocracy. And so there you have it. And so we have this whole structure. White power, either British royal white power, British parliamentary white power, or in Barbados itself, elite Barbadian plantocratic white power. And at the very bottom of the whole structure was the mass of enslaved Barbadians who were denied personal freedom, denied participation in the civic life of the country, excluded from participation in activities that could advance them economically, subjected to extreme impoverishment, and also subjected to an extremely harsh and bloody system of regimentation and criminal law. This was the old colonial system, and it was the antithesis, the absolute opposite of a republic, which is a state in which power and sovereignty resides in the mass of the people. And so the fundamental issue we must elucidate quickly is, how did the masses of the Barbadian people transform Barbados from that oppressive, elitist, oligarchical, unrepresentative, inhumane colonial society into an independent nation in which official power and authority is vested in the people and in their representatives, the members of parliament and the ministers of government that the people freely elect in periodic elections? How did Barbados make that journey from the old colonial system to the full-fledged Republic of Barbados that we inaugurated on the 30th of November, 2021? And I would say that the major component of Barbados' struggle towards a republican type of state in which sovereignty resides in the people, the main component of that struggle consisted of the struggle against slavery. And because you cannot have a state in which sovereignty resides in the people, or which power resides in the people, if the sizable majority of your people are reduced to a status of enslavement. And so the journey to the Republic of Barbados, the major steps in that journey have to do with the efforts of rebellion, resistance, the efforts that led to the breaking down of that system of slavery. And we can list them very quickly. The earliest evidence we have goes back to 1649, a servile revolt involving slaves as well as white indentured servants in that year of 1649. Then we go to 1675, the Coromanti Plot led by enslaved Africans, including Tony and King Coffee, and betrayed by a house negress by the name of Anna or Fortuna. 1631, another slavery conspiracy involving mainly Africa-born slaves. 1692, an Afro-Creole plot led by Barbados-born enslaved Africans known as Ben, Sambo, Hammond, and Samson, all elite artisans, and once again betrayed by a slave informant. 1701, another major Afro-Creole plot involving hundreds of conspirators. And then the big one, 1816, the Busa Rebellion, centered in St. Philip Parish, but engulfing half the island and producing such heroes as Nanny Gregg, Jackie, Kane Davis, Joseph Pitt, Washington Franklin, and of course, General Busa. And that Busa Rebellion is so important in dismantling the system of enslavement, because the Governor Lord Combermere says, look, after that Busa Rebellion, even though the rebellion is put down, but he says the white population in Barbados is ever apprehensive about when there will be the next uprising. And so it was the message sent by these uprisings, among which the Busa Rebellion features very prominently, the first major slave rebellion in the British Empire in the 19th century, sends a message to the colonial authorities. This system cannot continue, because if we do not take steps to abolish it from above, from the level of the British Parliament, these enslaved people in places like Barbados are going to abolish it through revolutionary action from below. And so between 1834 to 1838, slavery is abolished in Barbados and indeed in the British Empire. And so that is a major step forward in our journey towards a republic, in our journey towards a Barbados in which sovereignty resides in the people. Now that slavery was gone, we were now in a position, even though the franchise was still so restricted, even though the qualifications to become a member of the House of Assembly was still so restricted, because we were no longer slaves. In 1843, Samuel Jackman Prescott became the first man of African descent to gain election to the House of Assembly. And this is very significant. It's a major breakthrough that Black people now begin to participate in some of that legislative power. But we know that the planter oligarchy, the planter merchant oligarchy in Barbados attempted to still keep their hold over the country. And the years after 1838 proved very difficult for the masses of Black people. And ultimately in 1876, they felt compelled once again to rise up against the status quo in a military manner. And out of that military struggle that centered around a British governor, Pope Hennessy, who was attempting some reforms within the constitutional structure of Barbados, came into conflict with the local Barbadian oligarchy centered in the House of Assembly, and the suffering masses took the opportunity of that intra-elite conflict to strike out in rebellion once again. But in terms of looking at constitutional and political developments coming out of that 1876 so-called War of General Greene, or some history books say Confederation riots, we had an innovation in our constitutional structure. In 1876, Governor Hennessy had persuaded the British government to create in Barbados an executive council separate from the governor's legislative council. This executive council consisted solely of official members, such as the military commander of the troops, the colonial secretary, and the attorney general. But following the Confederation crisis, and led by Sir Conrad Reeves, the forces in the Barbadian House of Assembly, still very much dominated by the white plantocratic and merchant elite, were able to get a concession from the British colonial authorities. And that concession was that at the beginning of each legislative session, the governor would be required to choose one member of the Legislative Council and 4 members of the House of Assembly who, together with the governor and the Executive Council, would form a new Executive committee. So that new departure, the establishment of this new structure, an executive committee, would consist of the governor, the commanding officer of the military forces, the colonial secretary, the attorney general, one member of the legislative council, and 4 members of the House of Assembly, 9 members in all. And it was agreed that money bills and resolutions would henceforth only be introduced into the House of Assembly on the responsibility of this executive committee. Prior to that, any member of the House could introduce a money bill. The executive committee was also made responsible for preparing annual estimates of revenue and expenditure. All of this was really the work of Sir Conrad Reeves. Back then, it didn't mean too much to the Black masses because the power in the House of Assembly was still very much monopolized by the white merchant planter elite. But it came to mean something later on as Black people began to take control of more of that parliamentary power. And the journey towards that quickly, 1924, establishment of Dr. Charles Duncan O'Neill's Democratic League, where Black people are now coming together and establishing political institutions to fight for more power, more sovereignty, more rights. Of course, the 1937 People's Uprising, catalyzed by Right Excellent Clement Payne, that again sent such a chilling message to the authorities, both the British colonial authorities and the local plantocratic, Barbadian plantocratic authorities, that it led to very significant people power developments, such as the 1938 establishment of the Barbados Progressive League, Barbados Labour Party, the 1941 establishment of the Barbados Workers' Union on the basis of new legislation that permitted trade unions. 1943, the attainment of women's suffrage. For the first time, women gained the right to vote. And then in 1946, the so-called Bush experiment in responsible government. And this is when the reforms made by Sir Conrad Reeves at the instance of Sir Conrad Reeves in establishing the executive committee really became meaningful for Black people, because by 1946, the Black representatives of the Barbados Labour Party and the West Indian National Congress Party, led by Winter Crawford, had so asserted themselves that they had become the dominant forces in the Barbados House of Assembly. And in 1946, Sir Grattan Bush, the then governor, introduced a system whereby rather than the governor making these appointments, the person best able to command a majority in the House of Assembly was invited to name the 4 members of the House of Assembly, the 4 members that the House of Assembly would contribute to the executive committee, and those 4 members then took charge of particular government departments. So this became very significant for Black progress, and this paved the way for the introduction of a full ministerial system of government under Grantley Adams, later to become Sir Grantley in 1954. And other milestones along the way are the attainment of universal adult suffrage. And I'm just mentioning these as milestones because of limitation of time. But Black people had to fight for all of these things. They did not fall out of thin air. These achievements were as a result of struggle on the part of Black activists and political men and women. 1951, major breakthrough, attainment of universal adult suffrage. Finally, all of the restrictions of the franchise are removed, all Barbadians 21 years and over become entitled to vote. 1955, establishment of the Democratic Labour Party joins. So we had the Barbados Labour Party since 1938. The Democratic Labour Party comes on the scene in 1955, quickly establishing Barbados' two-party system. And of course, the major breakthrough in attaining our sovereignty and our rights, the attainment of independence in 1966. So not only do we have, by 1966, not only do we have black power, black political power, black control of the House of Assembly, for example, black control of the cabinet, for example. But on the basis of that power now, by 1966, we are able to say to Britain that that colonial enterprise that began so long ago in 1625, when that cross was erected in Old Town, and that cross was erected and that carving was made on the tree, we were removing ourselves from British colonial control and becoming independent. However, as we all know, we made two fundamental compromises. We did not, as a Barbadian nation, take the entirety of our sovereignty from British hands. We compromised in that we said that we were going to permit the British Privy Council to remain our highest national court, and we were going to permit the Queen of England to maintain her position as monarch of Barbados, although we were going to put conventions and practices in place that would make that fundamentally a symbolic situation, in that we would have a native governor general who would actually carry out the functions of the monarch. However, two fundamental compromises. It meant that because we had made these two compromises, we were not in a position to say that Barbados was a republic, that Barbados was a state in which all official power and authority is vested in the people and is articulated by the people's representatives chosen by them, because we were not in a position to say that Barbados had become a state in which there was full sovereignty. That is the power, the ability to do everything to govern itself. Because a big part of governing yourself is your judicial system, for example. And so if your highest national court is still a British court, you have not taken into your hands everything necessary to govern yourself, or similarly with your head of state being a foreign British head of state. By 2005, we had removed that Privy Council compromise when we abandoned the British Privy Council and established the Caribbean Court of Justice as our highest national court. And so this long, near 400-year journey towards a republic was consummated on the 30th of November, 2021, when we officially removed Queen Elizabeth II from the position of head of state of Barbados and installed a Barbadian elected by the combined members of our Barbadian House of Assembly and Senate in the person of Dame Sandra Mason, the first president of Barbados. And to make the point that what was significant is not only that we had moved away from any foreign British authority having any role in our constitutional arrangements, but we had also moved away from the hereditary principle, because you cannot be a republic if authorities are wielding power, are controlling elements of the instruments of governing the countries based on family background, based on belonging to some quote unquote special family. No, sovereignty must reside in the people. All official power must come from the people, who must freely elect their representatives who will control that power. And so Barbados only fully attained that sovereignty, that people's sovereignty, that status, that republican status on the 30th of November of 2021. Much credit to Prime Minister Mia Amor Motley, who piloted that historic development. Several prime ministers before her had threatened to do so, seemingly could not get it done. When Miss Motley made the move to do it, we were told, oh, she's going about it the wrong way, you know, the naysayers. She's doing, you know, it's the right thing, but she's going about it the wrong way. Well, of course, all the others who went before her attempted to go about it the right way and never achieved it. She who supposedly went about it the wrong way delivered the Republic of Barbados. And I understand from newspaper reports that the last speaker who delivered a lecture in this series was seeking to complain that nothing of substance had changed with the move to Republican status last year. Well, a lot has changed. Culturally and psychologically, a lot has changed. We have removed that badge of shame of having an independent country in which the people who colonized us and enslaved most of us, our ancestors, were still holding that highest secular office in our land. Yes, we know the symbolism of it, but that symbolism is extremely important. And it was a badge of shame. We have relieved ourselves of that badge of shame. And we know that the job ahead of us now, we knew that was what we were achieving on the 30th of November, 2021. That what we were achieving is to consolidate our national dignity, to remove these foreign elements from our constitutional arrangements, to consolidate the principle of democracy, that all official power must come from the people and their democratically elected representatives. But we now know that we've had that 400-year journey to the Republic of Barbados, and that the end of that journey is the commencement of the journey of the Republic of Barbados. And we know that the task ahead of us now is to be guided by those republican principles of democracy, people power, sovereignty residing in the people, people ownership of the nation. We know that the journey ahead of us now is to be guided by those principles, to institute all of the constitutional and economic and institutional reforms and changes and alterations that we may wish to make in our country in order to take forward the journey of the Republic of Barbados. I, for one, as a citizen of Barbados, am looking forward to participating and to helping to shape that journey of the Republic of Barbados. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador David Kamishan, for that very important longitudinal view of history. And I was so impressed that you had taken it from 1625 right down to 2021, looking at the evolution of the political system, looking at the establishment of the capitalist system based on slavery, then highlighting the acts of resistance and rebellion and those milestones along the way. And finally, addressing this matter of the significance of republicanism. And I like what you said about removing that badge of shame from the nation, to have a foreign monarch ruling in Barbados. And then, of course, all of that hinge on a very clear thesis that you advanced at the beginning. So I want to thank you so much, Ambassador, for that excellent presentation. I do not see any questions in the chat, but while we wait on persons to put questions there, I will ask my first question. And it is this. You have pointed to the exclusion of Blacks, especially working class Blacks, for over 212 years in Barbados. We have working class Blacks before 1951, people who did not have the franchise and the qualifications could not vote. But today, we have the vote, we have universal adult suffrage, but people are not taking the vote seriously. How do you explain our position today, or the position of people today who say, well, I'm not voting? How do you explain that in light of the struggle that was undertaken for that whole period in the early 20th century for the franchise?
I would indict the major political parties of Barbados to some extent. I think the major political parties have been at fault in bastardizing the vote, diluting the vote. The practice of buy-in votes, the practice of offering young people, in particular working class young people, money for votes, the practice of making elections into entertainment events. I think the major political parties of Barbados have to examine themselves very, very carefully, because we see signs of the kind of civic decay that you are referring to, ND. We see signs of social decay, civic decay, of some people with a lack of belief in that national project that so many of our ancestors fought for, and that we made a major step forward in when we attained our constitutional independence in 1966. And we cannot afford that. We cannot afford that. So I think there's a grave responsibility on our political class to recognize that they must be more responsible. We must aim at a more serious and more responsible type of politics. So I think what you are referring to, I think the cause of it is weak institutions, the institutions that were the vehicle for that nationalist impulse in our people, the institutions that came to the fore after 1937, the political party and the trade union. Those were the institutions back in 1951, Henderson. You would not have made, I'm sure you would not have made the kind of comment you're making now. Because back in 1951, when we finally attained universal adult suffrage, our people understood the value of that vote. They understood the value of political organization. They understood the value of trade union organization and the industrial struggle that was being waged back then by the Barbados Labour Party, the Barbados Workers Union, Winter Crawford's Congress Party, and so forth. But I think that as the system became institutionalized, the two-party system, the two parties kind of monopolizing it, becoming very institutionalized, perhaps very bureaucratic. Even the trade unions themselves, look, to some extent, losing sight of that vision, losing sight of that rootedness in the people's struggle, and drifting into the kind of institutional behavior that, in my opinion, is detrimental to a healthy civic culture that you are pointing to. And I experienced it as a person who was engaged in electoral politics in Barbados. The last election I contested as a member of the People's Empowerment Party in 2008. I mean, I was appalled by the level of vote buy-in and so forth. So it is my hope that we will see all the dangers of when that kind of behavior takes hold. We can see the social decay. We can see in Jamaica, for example, where the political class, the political institutions became so bereft of authority and respect from the people that the dons, the drug lords, the Duddesses and so forth, began to take over, began to assume legitimacy in the eyes of the people, and we can see where all of that leads. Barbadians, we as Barbadians, we too need to be able to see where all of that leads. We do not want to end up like a Jamaica or like some other Caribbean countries that we could refer to. And so yes, let me leave it there. But I'm seeing signs. I'm very pleased that the current administration has had the vision to understand that we need a system of people's assemblies, that we do need an intervention at that local governance level, where the people will elect the assemblies, where the people's assemblymen and women will be invested with a certain amount of power to hold the political class accountable, and to be able to exercise political power at the community level. So this, I am the deputy chair of the Thorne Commission on local governance, and we have designed the system of people's assembly. So that, for me, is an encouraging sign, but it is the direction in which Barbados really needs to go if we are to retrieve that strong, healthy civic culture that we know existed in the 1930s and 1940s and early 1950s.
Thank you. And there's another question here. This is from Philip. Is on the CCJ. It says, are there any concerns that the CCJ is comprised of persons from the region as opposed to Barbadians only? Does this mean that Barbadians cannot exercise governance over this court?
No, the CCJ has a panel of judges drawn from the CARICOM countries. Barbados does have a judge on that panel. I think the panel goes from between 7 to 9 judges. We have Justice Andrew Burgess, who sits on the panel of CCJ judges. Not every CARICOM country will always have a judge on the panel. After all, there are 14 independent CARICOM nations, and the panel is only 7 to 9. And actually, one of the panel is mandated, should be a person from outside, should be a judge from outside the CARICOM region as well. The point about the CCJ, look, the CCJ is our brainchild. The CCJ was devised by us, and by us, the Caribbean community, but Barbados played a very special role in the development of the CCJ. So David Simmons and and Mia Motley, who back then was our Attorney General. They played very important roles in crafting the CCJ. The CCJ is an institution that we should feel extremely proud about. I can't give you all the details here, but the CCJ, first of all, it is a very solid, financially solid institution. The CCJ is funded by a US $100 million trust fund. That's the first thing. So the CCJ does not depend on CARICOM governments to finance it. The governments put in the money at the outset into an independent trust fund that is managed separate from the governments, and the CCJ is therefore self-financing. So it is extremely secure. Secondly, the CCJ is run by a regional legal services commission that is extremely broad, and that pulls into it all of the bar associations, all of the relevant Caribbean legal institutions, including and our educational institutions as well. So the CCJ, the judges of the CCJ are insulated from any kind of political interference. The other thing about the CCJ is that it is extremely accessible. Any CARICOM citizen can actually easily have access to the CCJ, right? The Privy Council, on the other hand, is extremely inaccessible. It is estimated that for a Caribbean person to access the Privy Council in London, you probably have to find somewhere between $120,000 to $150,000. Because first of all, you have to retain UK-based counsel. You have to pay all kind of filing fees. You have to journey to the UK. It's a very expensive proposition, and really and truly, the only Caribbean people that really have access to the Privy Council as a final court of appeal are convicted murderers. Convicted murderers, you will get English human rights lawyers that will act for them pro bono. So convicted murderers, or wealthy Caribbean companies or institutions that could afford the kind of money that it will cost to actually prosecute and appeal before the Privy Council. So those CARICOM countries that have not yet signed up to the CCJ as their final court of appeal, they are really fooling themselves, because they only have this right of appeal to the Privy Council in theory. It is a theoretical right, but for all practical purposes, it is a right that is only accessible to very wealthy people or to corporations. The average citizen, the average working class citizen cannot think. He may feel he has a good case to appeal. He cannot think of taking it to the Privy Council. He can't afford it. However, he can easily take it to the Caribbean Court of Justice. In fact, if he is impoverished, the Caribbean Court of Justice would waive all of the filing fees. And if he can't travel to Trinidad, the Caribbean Court of Justice will engage him through the virtual technology wherever he is, or the Caribbean periodically, but actually travel to another CARICOM country to make justice accessible. So, and then the final point, so it's a wonderful institution, and the final point to make about it, so that we are all clear, all of our CARICOM countries have contributed to it. All of our CARICOM countries recognize it as the court that administers the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas. However, it is only 4 CARICOM countries that has recognized the other part of its jurisdiction. The other part of its jurisdiction is that it is available to become the highest national court of appeal of any CARICOM country, supplanting the Privy Council. And only 4 CARICOM countries thus far Dominica, Guyana, Belize, and Barbados have had the wisdom, to make it their final court of appeal.
Thank you. And while we wait on other questions, perhaps I can tender my second one, and this is relating to the Compromise of 1966. Why do you think Barbadians, Arabara and his cabinet retained the Queen in 1966 as well as the Privy Council? Why that compromise?
Yeah, that's a hard one. Some people would say, well, you know, Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago established the precedent in 1962. They were the first two to become independent, and that's the structure they went with. So that perhaps Barbados, coming 4 years later, simply followed the lead of Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago. However, there are other possibilities. Some years ago, when English documents were declassified, we discovered that Prince Philip, who had made a tour of the Caribbean in 1964, on his return to England, had actually written a confidential letter to the then British Prime Minister, urging him not to grant independence to Barbados. Prince Philip, the Queen's husband, he claimed in that letter to the British Prime Minister that he said to the British Prime Minister, don't mind what the political leaders are saying. The Barbadian people really don't want independence. In fact, they believe in us more than they believe in each other. You know, so there was that. Eric Barrow might very well have been aware that there were elements within the British power structure that wished to deny. Prince Philip said, of all the colonies, Barbados is the most British. It has always been British.
Yes.
For any change in the constitutional relationship should be similar to the Channel Islands, not full independence, you know, and the people don't want it. So Barrow might have been aware that there was that sentiment. Then you must remember as well, Barrow was under tremendous political pressure here at home. Mm-hmm. Remember, even two members of his cabinet broke ranks, Crawford and Ward, who were two committed federalists and who were so committed to the idea of Barbados trying to construct a federation of the Little Eight after the breakup of the Federation of the Ten, that they felt that Barbados should not go. They believed in independence, but they said Barbados should not go to independence alone. Barbados should continue to make the effort to establish a federation of the 8 Eastern Caribbean colonies, and then we go to independence as a federated state. So they resigned. They actually resigned from the cabinet and resigned ultimately from the party. Then there was the official opposition, the Barbados Labour Party, who, you know, the problem with our politics, oppositions oppose for the sake of opposing. So anything a government seeks to do, the opposition somehow feels it has to oppose. So you found the Barbados Labour Party opposing as well, and of course you will find all kinds of clever reasons. It's like, you know, there are all kinds of clever reasons for opposing something that is progressive. Similarly, last year when Prime Minister Motley said we're moving towards the Republic, it's a good idea, you know, but wrong timing and blah blah blah, and you need to consult more, and you need, you know. So political oppositions always find good reasons to oppose something that is progressive. So that was another source of opposition. Then there were the white people. There were the white people who said, if Barbados becomes independent, it will become a dictatorial banana republic under a black dictator in the form of Prime Minister Errol Barrow, and many of them pulled up stakes and headed off to Canada and Australia and New Zealand, only to discover a few years later that life in those countries was not as sweet as they had it in Barbados. And that indeed, this Prime Minister, far from being this black dictator, was proving to be an extremely democratic and developmental leader, progressive leader, taking the country forward. So I think that perhaps Barrow, being in the midst of all of this opposition, coming at him from so many different angles and with so many different rationalizations, perhaps felt, look, in order for me to calm some nerves, let us make these two compromises. And I guess in 1966, Barbados would have been only the fourth Commonwealth Caribbean country to become independent. There was no CCJ. There was no inkling of a CCJ. There was no collective court. So retaining the Privy Council would have been an easy decision to take. Retaining the first Commonwealth Caribbean country that went independent and immediately, and as part of that independence move, removed the Queen, was Dominica in 1917. It was not until 1979 that Dominica broke the pattern set by Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago in 1962 of beginning your independence journey with the Queen in place, and then gradually moving to Trinidad becoming a republic in 1976, and Guyana becoming a republic in 1970. So the first one, and all the rest followed that pattern. Grenada, all of them becoming independent, but with the Queen still in place. Dominica was the first to say, enough of that nonsense. We are becoming independent, and as part of that independence construct, there will be no Queen. So kudos to them. Something about Dominica, they also had the wisdom and self-respect to immediately join up to the Caribbean Court of Justice as well. Something in the culture of that little island is progressive. Right.
And my final question to you has to do with the role of the monarchy in enslavement. And you mentioned Elizabeth I and Hawkins in the 1560s. And my question to you is, what demands should we make? Any special demands you think we should make to the British monarchy for reparations?
Oh, definitely. Most definitely. Our reparations claim, the fundamental thrust of our reparations claim is directed at the national governments of those European countries that were involved in colonization and enslavement. And it has to be the national governments, because the national government is the institutional structure that links the present with the past. The national government is institutionally, the national government of 2022 is institutionally linked to the national government of 1627 or 1660. And the national government is also the repository of the national treasury, the national wealth. So it stands to reason that is our fundamental thrust. However, that is not the only thrust. Our reparations claim also has to be against those European institutions, whether they be mercantile companies, insurance companies, trading companies, manufacturing companies, universities, those institutions that were either directly involved in enslavement and slave trade, or that benefited from the ill-gotten gains from those crimes against humanity, and those families that also were implicated and that profited. And we can, in Barbados, we have a prime example of one of those families, the Drax family, the people that own Drax Hall. James Drax came to Barbados on that first settlement voyage in 1627. He came as an 18-year-old. The Drax family has been permanently in Barbados since 1627. And that Drax Hall plantation has been in, he started in other locations, but then they consolidated in St. George at the present Drax Hall site from the early 1640s, and he pioneered the sugar revolution and so forth. And up to today, that family has maintained that property for close to 400 years. And as we all know, the current leading representative of that family, Sir Richard Drax, is a member of the British House of Commons and is in fact the wealthiest member of the British House of Commons. So Barbados is going to be directing a reparations claim at the Drax family. And if Barbados is going to direct a reparations claim at the Drax family, it stands to reason that we must also direct a reparations claim at the British royal family for their involvement. And very encouragingly, at the last Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Rwanda a few weeks ago, Prince Charles, the heir to the British monarchy, addressed the opening ceremony of that Heads of Government conference and said that he said that if we are to unlock the potential of the future, we have to come to terms with the history of enslavement and the many wrongs that were committed. And we have to find new ways. He said that he has now come to recognize the enduring negative impact of slavery and the wrongs committed during the period of slavery, that there's an enduring impact up to today. And he recognizes that we have to find new ways to address that legacy, and that he is of the opinion that this is a conversation whose time has come. Now that is a very, very telling position from Prince Charles. And this is obviously a deliberate and calculated statement. Remember, the official position of the British government is, as enunciated by Prime Minister David Cameron in 2016 when he visited the Caribbean and he was presented with the reparation demand. What did he say? He said he would advise us to get over it. The book has been closed on that. Get over it. He said, you all want reparations? Well, far from reparations, what I'm willing to offer you all is I'm willing to build a prison. I am offering Jamaica the British government is willing to build for you a prison in Jamaica that you can house the criminal Jamaicans that we will be deporting back to you. That was his response to the claim for reparations. Now, so the British government has an official anti-reparations position. Here is the heir to the throne addressing a Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting and making a statement like that. That cannot be a casual statement. That is a calculated statement. And so kudos to Prince Charles. Prince Charles has given us something. Prince Charles actually he has made a statement, and he obviously expects us to recognize the significance of that statement, to pick it up, and to make use of it in our activism. So it seems to me that Prince Charles may very well become a key ally in our campaign for reparations. But Prince Charles needs to know that his family has a lot to answer for, and that his family, and it's good that his consciousness is awakening. He's coming to recognize the damage that was done, because his family is going to be asked to make compensation. It's only a matter of time, Hendy. And I want everybody who is listening, look, our claim for reparations, it is historically sound. It is based on the facts. It is sound in international law. It is sound in morality and ethics.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a case that is founded, that is rooted in the facts, is rooted in morality, is rooted in the law, then once you are prepared to pursue that case with righteousness and determination and passion and commitment, you are bound to succeed. It is only a question of when. Once we stick with it, we will succeed. And that is perhaps my closing message. Reparations is a key issue. In fact, I think it is the most important policy issue. And it is the most important policy issue because the more we unearth that history, we unearth and lay bare the wrongs that were done to us, the degree to which we were looted and plundered of our resources, the degree to which those who are wealthy and powerful in this world today attain that wealth at the expense of looting and plundering us and our resources. And that as a result of that history, we now have a fundamental right to development. That is so powerful because that has implications, not just for the standard reparations claim, but that has implications for our claim for climate justice, our claim for the implementation of the sustainable developmental goals, our claim against being blacklisted, our claim for special and differential treatment in trade and economic matters, our insistence that we must not be written out of access to grant and concessional financing on the basis of GDP per capita criteria, and so and I can go on and on. The reparations cause is a fundamental source of strength for us in all areas of our international diplomacy. And it is working. I am telling you, I am seeing it from where I sit in CARICOM. I can see the work being done by the reparations movement, infusing a new strength and steel and backbone in CARICOM policymakers and governmental leaders in their interactions and negotiations, and the righteous demands that they're now making of the international system.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. And while you were saying that, I just remembered that I came across a document recently where a group of slaves, I believe there were over 100 slaves, gathered at St. Philip's Church. I'm not sure whether it's the parish church or not, but they gathered at a St. Philip's Church 4 days before emancipation in 1838. And you know what they were demanding? Compensation. They gathered there in St. Philip and they were demanding compensation. And their demands were significant because the governor wrote out to St. Philip to quell the protests, quell the disturbance, and quell those demands, so that these people were sufficiently conscious to demand compensation for what they had gone through during slavery. So I just want to put that in there. I will send you the document sometime, David. But I think it is very important that we make that point that enslaved people were demanding compensation as well. David, I want to thank you so much for this very engaging lecture that has brought home the significance of history and not understanding the present. It has also brought home the significance of the Republic, because there's people who still say that they don't understand the Republic. And I think you've made a very important point, that that Republic removed that badge of shame. And that's a very important point. And finally, of course, you dealt with the issue of reparations, etc. So I thank you for a very engaging lecture and discussion. And I want also to thank the staff, the very hardworking staff, Kay and Elena and others at the Barbados Museum and Historical Society for putting on this lecture and tracking down lecturers and chairs and making sure that the platform is ready. Also the UWI and the Embassy of Argentina for their support. I want to thank you, the online audience, those on Zoom, those on Facebook, and thank you for your questions as well. And thank you for being here. Without you, we would not have had anybody to speak to. So thank you for coming and turning up. And next week, the 27th of July, we have Jeff Cumberbatch, who will be lecturing. He will start at 3 o'clock, same time. He will present the lecture next week. So please join us next week for this continuation of the series on the Republic, exploring 400 years of the political experiment, the road to the Republic. I want to thank you very much for a wonderful evening, a wonderful lecture and discussion. And I wish you all the best this afternoon. May God bless you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
You are welcome.